So in the beginning is what's recorded in Scripture. And they're the days of creation, day 1, day and night. Day 2, water and sky. Day 3, land and plants. Day 4, sun, moon and stars. Day 5, fish and birds. Day 6, animals and humans. And then God saw everything that he'd done, and then he rested. But I want you to note the interdependence on those days of creation for a mature creation. 6 days, and it was all done. And so we follow the logic of God where we have day and night. And of course, it's very difficult to do anything without the light. And so we have the ability to actually see what's going on. The water and the sky, obviously that needs to be in place with the firmaments and the waters. And then, of course, we've got the land and the plants. They have to be there in order to balance out the cycle of the oxygen and the nitrogen as the trees put out the CO2, and we, of course, breathe in the oxygen. And so that needed to be in that order for balance. The sun, moon and the stars are then produced and set in order so that when the seas are actually working to fulfill their purpose in feeding the actual housing the fish and those sorts of things, there we have the currents and the hot and the cold streams that can actually start to function now because we have the things which are in place for them to do that. And then, of course, we go into the fish and the birds and the animals and the humans. And so that logic flowing through, everything needed to be in place before the next thing could be actually created and established. And God, in the infinite wisdom which he has, he was able to order that in 6 days. And we really scarcely can comprehend the vastness of all of those things that had to be thought of and designed and planned and effective in 6 days. And then finally God saw everything he did and he rested. When we come to the comment which was made to Job, we find that Job is most likely contemporary with Abraham or with the patriarchic era. And certainly because of that, he's a lot more closer in time to creation. And therefore, the comments about creation and the things which are talked about in creation, for the talk of Elihu, and then as God takes over from there, we can see that there is a man in Job 1 and verse 1. There was a man from the land of Uz, whose name was Job. But what about that man? What's recorded about that man? He was perfect and upright and one that feared God. So pretty good credentials, brothers and sisters, for a particular person who is believing in God. And when we come to this sort of tail end of the book of Job, we can see that Job needed to be educated. And so God sets about to educate Job and to really get him to think about a right perspective about himself and about the God who made him, the God who was placing him in those circumstances and developing him for his good. So we can see there that Yahweh educates Job with 13 questions, the wonders of God's inanimate creation. This one here. Okay. So we first of all find that there's 5 questions, and then there is the 9 questions. The first ones are to do with the inanimate creation. And God says, who controls the sea? Thanks, Nick. Who controls the sea? And he asks the question, who commands the dawn? Do we know the mysteries of the earth and light? God says. Do we understand the weather and in all its variations? And who controls the stars, the clouds, and the lightning? So they're the questions which, as we go through Job 38 and sort of 39 and the tail end of this book, God is saying to Job, I want you to stand still and I want you to think about these things. And we can see there that there's a fairly decent list there of God's creation, but not only the creation, but the maintenance of the things which have been created. and the control of those things which have been created. And we can see there that God is across all of those things. They don't just happen. We observe them, but they don't just happen. And sometimes we don't even understand what's going on. So the next time we go for a walk, perhaps just taking that first one for one example, the next time we go for a walk along the seashore and we enjoy a little bit of relaxation and take in some of the creation of God, well, perhaps we can see that there's this verse. Let's go back one. Yes, that verse in Jeremiah 5:22. Do you not fear me, declares Yahweh? Do you not tremble before me? I place the sand as the boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier that it cannot pass. Though the waves toss, though they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot pass over it. And so there, God has set the boundaries of the ocean. And as we walk across the sand on a lovely walk to find some relaxation, maybe that's a thought that we can think about there, that boundary with that seashore is there because God has set it there. And God controls that. And God is managing that all the time. So God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And as we commented earlier on, physically and spiritually, it's very difficult to do anything or to achieve anything without light. And so God brought about that ability that things might progress with the creation that he was about to effect. And then we read in Genesis 1 and verse 16, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And so we have the atmosphere and we have the waters which are divided, that there might be this definition as to what is atmosphere, what is air, and what is actually water. And I think this next slide gives us a bit of an idea as to what that might look like. And so we've got the waters above the earth, and we've got the waters below the earth, and we've got the sky. And in Psalm 104 and verse 5, it says, he set the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood still, stood above the mountains. A little bit vague there. So we can see there that there is the divine design of separating the atmosphere and placing the land and having the waters around it so that there might be, of course, the next phase, and that is to start inhabiting those lands with plants and trees and birds and animals and the waters in the sea to populate that with fish and great creatures. And so God is moving through his creation, and he's got all of these things worked out just perfectly. When we come to a dawn and a sunrise, the beginning of a new day, brothers and sisters, and often we don't always often see the sunrise, do we? But often we see the dawn coming through as the light comes and as the sun rises. And of course, Job 38 and verse 12, there's the question, have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place? In other words, the dawn comes up not out of sequence, not out of time, regularly at the right time, and taking into account, of course, the preset seasons of the earth, as we have summer and winter and we have spring and autumn. And of course, the timing of that rising of the dawn, the rising of the sun is set, and God's done that from the day of that creation. I think one of the things which we do like to enjoy is sunsets. And that's just a very beautiful sunset there, but I'm sure you've all got sunset pictures in your minds from holidays or from the evening as it goes. But it's a very good reflection for us, isn't it, as we perhaps consider the day which we've had. And I think sometimes it's a good reflection for us, brothers and sisters, to think about whether or not we've used that day wisely in God's service, just wisely in general. And it gives us an opportunity to just reflect on the time which we've had, which, of course, once that day goes and that sun sets, it never comes back again. What's gone is gone. What we haven't done that day is not going to be done. So it's a reminder for us to actually do those things and to do them wisely as we wisely use the time. But there's some beautiful sunsets around. And I'm sure that we have very, very many fond memories of enjoying those as it's gone down and closed off the day. It's an interesting question which is asked here. Dost thou know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him which is perfect in knowledge? And so there's a very deep question here as Job is asked, do you understand how the clouds work and what goes on? And I think when we have a look at the complexities, it's not just clouds, but there's variations of clouds. There's the ones which are a little closer to the earth, the stratus. A little higher up, we've got the alto stratus. And higher up again, we've got the cirrostratus. And we've got variations even within that, with the formations. As we can have a look there on that particular slide, we can see that there's different formations. Some clouds are small and patchy, some are very large, some are connected. And as we can see on the right-hand side there, some clouds even develop vertically, not even horizontally like most do, but some do actually develop in a vertical position. And so Job has asked that question. Do you understand the workings of him which has made the clouds and the balancings of the clouds? And each one of those has its purpose. And there's some very interesting cloud formations, which I'm sure you've seen and I've seen, but there's some very spectacular ones. They're not artistically dressed up. They are virtual pictures of clouds. And we can see the wonder of the variations, which we can see there in the balancing of the clouds. And I think what we can do, of course, is just take on board the wonderful Creator who has actually made those clouds and who controls the ferocity of the winds which are swirling around some of those particular clouds there ahead of a storm which is coming with all its ferocity. There's another dimension as well which I find quite fascinating, and that is this is a 100-kilometre long storm wall at the entrance point in Broome, West Australia. Now that is 100 kilometres in length. And in Job 38, verse 37, it says, who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens? And it's like this great big bucket of water, which when God determines, he will tilt that and out comes the rain. But I just find it absolutely staggering to imagine the amount of water which is involved in that particular cloud, 100-kilometre long. How heavy is the water which has got us suspending and keeping up there until the appropriate time when he wants to release that water? And as it says there, it can tilt the water skins of the heavens. What a wonderful thing to contemplate that and to perhaps look at something like that and observe that and think, well, wow, look at the wonderful power that we have in the God of our creation. And so I think we can just stand in awe of those things and think about what God has done and what he's continuing to do. It's just a very quick slide here. We've done a little bit of editing there because some of them weren't particularly that relevant, but there's some verses there which talk about the beauty of the earth and the wonders that God has made. And it covers virtually the whole of Scripture from Genesis through to Revelation. I think that's the point we want to just underline here. And so we can see that there is a vast number of verses in the Bible which talks about the wonderful creation of God and how we ought to actually really stop and consider it a little bit more than perhaps we do. I think another thing which is important is to understand that you might remember in Genesis 8 and verse 22, of course, this is after the flood, where we have this comment here, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cloud and heat and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. And so there's our seasons. There's the time parameters for each day and for each night. And we can see there that there's the rolling seasons going through. But I think an interesting point here, of course, is that when we think about the earth being clothed with the seed time and harvest, of course, Noah came out of the ark, as, of course, in the first creation. And they were a mature creation. The actual trees were fruit-bearing trees, ready to feed those who were coming out. There was the need to feed. The animal world that was coming out was with Noah, but in the first creation, of course, it's not as though there was God planting lots of little seedlings and we're waiting and waiting and waiting for them to grow. They were mature plants, able to produce food, and as we have there, seed time and harvest. And right the way through, God ordained that the various seasons would come. And of course, some of the fruit trees will produce fruit twice, some in other seasons, and so there's this rolling production of food. But it was a mature creation, fully ready to sustain the population of the animals and the humans, which would, of course, populate it. And so there we have a wonderful picture of what God is prepared to do with the consistency. And here we are so many thousands of years later, and we see exactly that consistency. But do we really think about it? Well, in Genesis 1 and verse 16, and God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And of course, we know that he's talking about the various planets and the orbits which they go through. And it sounds very easy to just sort of read that and just look at that and say, oh, well, God made those things. But it's not until we stop and consider exactly how those things were made and the order that they were put in, because involved in that is not only the actual planets, the consistency of the planets, the makeup of the planets, the actual pattern of the planets in their circuits. So the little video here which might help us to understand a little bit more about the depth behind that verse. So we'll just watch that now.
Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Mercury is both very hot and very cold. It has many craters on its surface due to its thin atmosphere. It only takes Mercury 88 days to revolve around the sun, but slightly more than 58 days to rotate on its axis. Venus is the hottest of all the planets, with temperatures close to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Venus has no moons or rings. On Venus, the sun rises in the west and sets in the east because Venus spins backwards on its axis. Earth is about 2/3 water. Only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water. Earth's atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1% other ingredients, which is the perfect balance to breathe and live. Mars is the red planet because of the rust in its soil. There are no rings around Mars. Mars makes an orbit around the sun in 687 Earth days. Jupiter has more than 75 moons. Jupiter rotates once about every 10 hours, but it takes about 12 Earth years to complete one orbit around the sun. Jupiter is a gas giant, so it lacks a solid surface. Saturn's atmosphere is mostly hydrogen and helium. Saturn has a total of 62 moons. Saturn has a spectacular ring system with 7 rings and several gaps between them. Uranus gets its blue-green color from the methane gas in the atmosphere. It is the first planet found with the aid of a telescope. The axis of Uranus is tilted 98 degrees, meaning it essentially spins on its side. It takes Neptune about 16 hours to rotate once and about 165 Earth years to orbit the sun. The methane gas in the atmosphere gives Neptune its blue color. Neptune is the coldest planet. The average temperature on Neptune is about minus 200 degrees Celsius, which is minus 392 Fahrenheit. Thanks for watching.
Well, did you know that? Some might know a few things of that. But when you just read that verse in Scripture that says that God made the sun and the moon and the planets, there's only one planet where life can be sustained. And that's Earth. And that's where Adam and Eve were placed. Isn't that wonderful? Only one. And the others, of course, are just either gases or they have too much exposure to the sun because it takes so long for them to revolve around the sun or to actually revolve on their axis. And so they're being hit by the sun and scorched by the sun in one particular spot for too long. Whereas, of course, the Earth is just the one day and we've got 365 days to go around the sun. So God in his wisdom, we just read that one verse, and God in his wisdom, he's done all of that. And yet we so often don't even think about the wonder of that particular creation. And just looking at the inanimate world which God has made, God asked another question. He says, "Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guard Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth?" And so when we come to that first one in Pleiades, there is the cluster of stars or galaxies which are forming that particular arrangement. And we're talking about way, way, way into deep space. This is picked up, of course, by some of the strongest satellites that we have and some of the strongest observation equipment which is around. But there they are, as God said. He says, well, look, can you bind the sweet influences of Pleiades? He says, Job, when I made those sorts of things, where were you? And trying to give Job some perspective. Then he talks about Orion. And so there we have Orion, again, which is a number of stars forming a particular cluster. And as you know, when you look at the stargazing side of things, there's particular shapes which we can pick up. And there they are. And so Orion is there today, as it was when God asked that question of Job so long ago. They're definable things, but they're wonderful things. They're expansive things. And God is wanting Job to sort of just stand still and just wonder at the wonderful things which I've done. But then he says, well, can you guide Arcturus with his sons? And so when we come to Arcturus, we can see there's Arcturus, and there's the sons in Pollux and Merit, I think. But I just want you to notice the little comment at the top there on the left-hand side. It says Earth doesn't even feature in this. And we find that Arcturus is 25 times the size of the sun. 25 times the size of the sun. And Pollux is 9 times the size of the sun. And the other sun is Merit, which is 3 times the size of the sun. And the size of the sun is 1,392,000, so it's 1,392,400 kilometres across. I'll read that again, 1,392,400 kilometres across the sun, and Arcturus is 25 times the size of that. Now that's the God that we worship. And that was all done in one day. One day. Absolutely amazing. So then we have a look at another look at Arcturus, and there we can see some familiar, the Big Dipper there on the right-hand side. That's the grouping around Arcturus. And then, of course, I think whether they call that the kite or what, I don't really know, but we can define the consistency in the skies year in, year out. They're there in the same clusters. But can you imagine something which is 25 times the size of the sun? Well, I don't think I can imagine that at all. But when we start to have a look at the creation, then we go into deep space. In Psalm 19 and verse 1 says to the choir master, a psalm of David. So David understood this. David had time in the fields as a shepherd to think about this stuff and to really, really look at the stars and wonder and to say, the heavens declare the glory of God and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. And there's some images from the more recent telescope, the James Webb telescope, and that's deep space there. And we can see that there's the clusters which are named, thousands and thousands of stars. And there we can see that that was all done. That was all arranged with the consistency and the stability and the orbits in one day. It's mind-blowing, isn't it, brothers and sisters? One day. And Job's asked to consider that. Well, of course, we know God set the bow in the sky in Genesis 9 and verse 16 as he gave this promise. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I, says God, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And of course, we've got the normal double rainbow, which of course we see, but it's interesting to see that there's a reverse in the colours. So if you look at those closely, you'll find that the colours are reversed. And that's quite an interesting little spiritual lesson as well as we have a look at that. The one on the left is actually not a Photoshop thing either. It's a phenomenon where you've got a rainbow, but then you've got other rainbows which are underneath it. You can see the overall rainbow just in the top there, but then we've got these other sort of images which are coming through as reflections of that one rainbow, and that came up with that particular effect there. And they're amazing things in themselves, are they not? But another phenomenon of the skies is something which we experienced here not so long ago, 66,000 lightning strikes in one particular storm. Remember that? That was some lightning show. But I think the thing which amazes me is that when I look at that and think about 66,000 lightning strikes in just one storm, that's some battery. That is some battery. There's a lot of electrical voltage that is being generated. It's just amazing to think about that. And of course, the power of where the strikes are occurring. I mean, there's just enormous energy in those particular lightning strikes. 66,000. I sometimes wonder how they actually do count those. Well, there's another thing which is also interesting when we have a look at what God created. And again, things which just escape our attention. And there's a phenomenon in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere called the northern lights or the southern lights, and the northern aurora or the southern aurora. And these, of course, are reactions within the skies of various things which are a direct connection with the sun. And so we've got here just a little diagram. We've got the sun, we've got solar winds, solar flares, and they are projecting things towards the earth. But we notice that there is a little magnetic barrier around through there. And so all these solar flares and all these things coming, they hit that magnetic barrier and they're deflected. And they're deflected upwards and over. And some, of course, just go right out into space, and others will come up and they'll find a weak spot in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. They find the poles is the weak spot. So that's what the aurora looks like in the northern aurora. Beautiful, beautiful skies lit up, quite a tourist attraction. But that's happening each and every day. And of course, the effects are only really seen at night time when we see the reaction. So what's causing the variety of colours? And again, this is something that God's made and which we don't really understand very much about. So what are the colours? Well, here's what makes the colours. We've got the electronics colliding with the various molecules in the atmosphere. The resulting excitation of these collisions causes varying colours caused by the height and type of the molecules hit. And so we see there that the red ones are hitting oxygen molecules, the blue ones are hitting nitrogen molecules, the green ones are hitting oxygen molecules, and the pink is hitting nitrogen molecules. But they're at a different height, different levels. So they're the varying gases which, of course, they're being hitting. And then as we go in height from above the Earth's surface up to 100 Ks is generally going to be blue, and then purple from 100 to 160, and then from 160 to 240, we can see that there's the actual greens and the reds coming through there. And so we can see this is all created by God, and this happens very, very regularly. I just want to show you a little video clip of what that looks like from the South Pole, which of course was the weak area of the particular Earth's atmosphere when it came to the magnetic field. So we'll just do that now. That's the Milky Way we're looking at there. So that's what those people who are fortunate enough to live in the South Pole will see. If you like cold weather, that's great. But just fantastic. And we can see that that's all part of the design which God has. Moving along then, we've got to just have a look at the animate world. And so these questions come forward as well. Do you know what about God's power in creation. Who feeds the lions, young lions and the ravens? Do we understand the breeding of wild animals? Who gives the wild ass its freedom? Who tames the ox? Do we know why the ostrich is foolish? Who gave the war horse its courage? Who was responsible for the eagle's attribute? So all those blue words, when we're looking at the creation of the animal world, the animals and the birds, we can see there that God has had to think about all of these things at creation, about their food, about their breeding, about their habitats, about their characteristics and their features, and all of those things as he then made this immense creation. And of course, that's just looking at the animal world. Then, of course, we've got the actual plant life as well. So it's a pretty good start here. That's some tree, isn't it? We can see the children there. Not very big at all. And then we can see over here there's some people just there. That's just a massive tree. And then, of course, we've got the variety of trees. There's a 3,000-year-old olive tree in Jerusalem. And it's fairly authentic. That's actually as what the age is, 3,000 years. We've got a gigantic Bilbao tree, and then we've got the Australian gums, all with their variety, but they're all trees. They've all got different characteristics, and they've got different objectives to achieve. And we go from those sorts of trees to the more fancy sort of trees. Just absolutely stunning when we have a look at those. And the colours and the effects, but the texture. And they all grow in different environments. They need different sort of weather conditions, different water conditions. There, of course, is your cherry blossoms. They come out at a set time, don't they? Always at the same time. Absolutely beautiful to look upon. There we've got a very fruitful date tree in Israel. We've got the little bonsai tree in the middle there, which of course is just a miniature tree compared to that great big one that we saw at the beginning of our consideration of the plant life and as we move into the animal world. Then we've got grapes. We've got grapes in Ashkelon, Israel, and there you've got green grapes and black grapes on the same tree. And then, of course, the variety of red grapes coming through there. Just wonderful when we have a look at how that's been made and created. And then we've got the pomegranates coming through again, which is very prolific in Israel. Their own specific type of plant. And so we can see through the trees and through the fruits that God has this variety of sizes and shapes and purposes. And then we move into the plant life. There's some interesting plants there. Yellow-faced sun orchid. Sort of look like birds, don't they? They look like birds. Some very, very funny features there. But then we've got other plants which are like this. And that's an interesting one. And so that's a plant. You've got to look at it and say, well, I thought somebody's done a Photoshop on that, but no, I checked it out. And of course, we can see this elephant-looking plant. Just amazing when we look at the variety of the actual flowers and the plants. And then we've got this one here. What's interesting about that particular picture? We've got on the right-hand side, we've got what they call the monkey orchids. They're rigid-edge orchids. They look just like monkeys. And in the middle there, we've got a flower coming through, which looks like it's a bird, but we can see the kernel that's coming out of. And so we've got sort of plants that look like animals. But it's interesting because which came first, the animals or the plants? It's actually the plants. The plants came first and the animals came later. So obviously, before the monkeys were made, there's a fair idea as to what they might look like. It's just interesting, isn't it, when we have a look at the wonders of creation. And so there's some interesting ones there. When we have a look at the size of some of the plants as well, some are growing up from the ground, some are growing down from the trees, but there's a plant there, which I think on the left-hand side, there only flowers once every so many years, and when it does flower, it smells awful. So they're probably very happy it only flowers every so many years. But we can see the diversity of the plants. And it's just amazing to think that creation, all of these variations, were all done in one day. And then we've got, of course, these flowers here, which are just beautiful. Some of those are very large. The one in the middle there would be almost as tall as a person. And just again, the variety as we go through. There's some there which we can see the variety of the growing areas. Some grow in deserts, some grow in forests, some grow in, of course, just normal type sort of areas. But we can see the beauty of God's creation if we take the time to look. And then we've got some beautiful flowers there. All very interesting, but all very unique in their compilation and in their appearance and in their structure. The type of climates that they grow in, and so on and so forth. How much water they need, how much sunlight they need. All of those things, God knew that. Then we go into the sea world, and we're these very unusual looking creatures. And they are unusual. The crab in the middle there, or the lobster in the middle there, look at the brilliant colours there. Just amazing when you have a look at that and think about that being created and designed. And then we go to another seahorse. That seahorse doesn't have little sort of fins and wings. It just gets along by their movement. And then we've got a beautifully camouflaged turtle there as well. All of these things above the water, in the bird life and the animal life, and below the water. And we could go on and on and on and on. And then you have the contrast between some very, very adorably playful porpoises, and we can see there just the lovely little family sort of life that we have there, from playful and very happy dolphins, porpoises, to fierce and ferocious orcas or killer whales. Very, very similar, aren't they? But different purposes, different attributes, different colour characteristics, and of course different environments where they tend to habitat. So that's the wonder of the God that we worship. And then we move into the bird life. And again, I find not only the remarkable colour and the style and the shape of these birds, but each one of those has its own bird call. They talk to each other. They understand each other because they've got a unique bird call. We've got kookaburras over here in Australia. You don't get kookaburras anywhere else, but they understand each other. And so I just find not only do we see the appearance, but their habitats, how they get on. We've got a little bird there that's building a nest upside down, as you do. And then we've got the owl there, which looks very impressive. And then we've got this elephant-looking bird. Can you see an elephant there on the left? Well, it's actually a bird. You can see the beak picking some stuff out of the mud. It just happens to have its wings flapped out and a couple of little white feather things there that look like eyes. But it's giving the appearance of being a lot bigger than what it really is, and that's part of its protection. And then we've got those other birds there with the beautiful colours in them. And then the design of these birds here, which is just so wonderful. When we have a look at the one on the left-hand side there with all its colours and all the feathers, just magnificent. And then we've got some interesting birds like this one here, which I don't know whether it's fluffing its feathers or whether it's just simply overweight and it's going to have a lot of trouble flying. It could be either. But you can see there from that to the beautiful flamingos, which of course are just stunning. And then we move through to that old mother hen with this little chick in the middle there, and these very, very, I suppose, fashionable birds on the right-hand side there, and all their glory and glamour. And then we go to totally different bird life you've got your roosters there, and then you've just got your very normal type birds, but with beautiful, beautiful colours. And when we look at that, and that's the bird creation, we can see, as it says in Genesis 1 and verse 21, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. And why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he when we have a look at just a part of that splendour of that creation there? And God looked at it and it was good. But then, of course, we've got the animal world as well, where we've got, of course, some lovely pictures there, quite a contrast between them. That's quite a contrast as well. The one on the left, of course, is just a classic picture of a lion. And on the one on the right-hand side is what happens if you don't actually shear your sheep. It just grows very, very big. And then we've got, just go back here, we've got that other one there. They're both of the horse type sort of family, after their kind, but very, very different. And then we've got, of course, the polar bear and the brown bear. Both bears, both live in very, very totally different environments, totally different circumstances, but they adapt to live in that. And their characteristics are somewhat different as well. And then we've got the insects, which would seem to be the smallest. But you take out the bee out of the equation in our world and we're in trouble because of the pollination that goes on and the cross-pollination that the bee does. A wonderful, wonderful work. God knew that. And when he made them, along with the beautiful praying mantis on the left-hand side there, and would you believe the one on the right-hand side is actually a fly. Flies actually can look quite attractive. They can be a nuisance, but they can look quite attractive as well. And when we look at all of that, brothers and sisters, we can see there, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures after his kind, cattle and creeping things, beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, I'd just like to just have a little bit of a summary of that. I just want to show a very, very short video, which is called Creation Calls, but it shows the actual splendour of God's creation in a very visual way. So let's just have a look at that. Just to conclude, brothers and sisters, we come to man, the pinnacle of God's creation. That's us. And I think when we read the Psalm of David, which I'll just read for you now, we can get a picture of David's appreciation of the creation and of his position in that. And so to the choir master, according to Gittith, the Psalm of David, O Yahweh, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babes and infants you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. And when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honour, and have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Yahweh, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And so man was given the dominion. And of course we know that man lost the dominion, but he was the pinnacle of God's creation. with all the intricacies of our human existence, of our human frame, of our intelligence, of all of the things which make us up, our emotions, our characters, and so on and so forth, our memories. We were the pinnacle of God's creation, and God looked on that, and he was very, very pleased. And I think just to conclude, we just want to have this little reflection on Psalm 46 and verse 10. Because taking all of that in consideration, God says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." And of course, brothers and sisters, we've got an opportunity as we reflect upon the wondrous works of God to actually do exactly that, and that is to give God the exaltation for his wondrous works which he's done, and to sing of his praises, and to endeavour to follow him, so that ultimately we will be part of that scene there where we will exalt among the nations and God will be exalted in all the earth. And we can do that. But we need to pause and consider the wondrous works of God. Thank you.